we're going to talk about some philosophers and criminologists. One of the things that pops out to me, I told you I started out in a community college. I started out in a seat just like this. One of the words I never thought I would end up saying was describing somebody as my favorite philosopher. It just seemed like a foreign idea. We're going to talk about Jeremy Bentham today. Hopefully we get to him. And he's my favorite philosopher, my favorite criminologist, favorite in the way in which he looks at crime, looks at the way crime can be studied. So when we get to that, it was a very strange feeling to have myself, to realize as I examined myself, do some self-reflection and realize that I have a favorite philosopher. It's something different than I'd ever experienced before. So let's talk about how crimes occur. I know we talked about the definitions of crimes. We're still going to touch on that again. We have a couple different types of crimes: spontaneous and like crimes of opportunity. Who has an example of, or who can think of an example of like a spontaneous crime, one that wasn't well thought out or planned?
Second-degree murder.
In what way?
Say like a husband and a wife are having a heated argument. So like a spontaneous murder.
Right. So you didn't put a lot of thought into it before you realized it was happening. It was happening. It can also happen with some property crimes. Some would say that even crimes of opportunity could be spontaneous if that opportunity was presented to you before you put a lot of thought into it. And then you have your well thought out, rationalized crimes. A lot of those, that gray area of crimes of opportunity also falls into that. So, I don't know if I have the right answer for you, but I'll ask. If you're walking down the street and you see somebody at night and you see somebody's window down and their laptop is sitting in their passenger seat, can we call that if a crime occurs, can we call that a crime of opportunity? Did the victim of that crime, the potential victim of that crime, present an opportunity for the suspect? Okay. So did the suspect think it out? Is it a well thought out crime or is it a spontaneous crime? Which category do you think it would fall under?
Spontaneous.
I think a lot of times it would. I would venture to say that it could fall under both, because if you weren't planning on taking any laptops tonight, then exactly right, spontaneous. You see, and I'll keep saying you, but we'll say the suspect. Suspect walks down the street and they see that laptop. They may just be overcome with the urge to take that laptop and have no desire to do it. Whereas you can put that same scenario with a car burglar who's walking down the street and planned on breaking the cars and then saw this and realized, well, great, now I don't have to break into a car and the window's open for me. That's a well thought out crime. The opportunity presented itself and made it easier to facilitate that crime. Sometimes the law takes into account people can be overcome with an opportunity to break the law, and it's not necessarily their fault. So one of the things that comes into, again, going back to undercover work with human trafficking and doing prostitution stings. Sometimes we would, there would be undercover officers that would go into a known prostitution area, so there'd be a lot of streetwalkers in the area, and they would go up and engage them in conversation. And in that conversation, eventually there would be an offer for, a sexual act for some sort of compensation. That's the definition of prostitution, an offer of compensation for a sexual act. So if the undercover officer just drives up to what they believe to be a potential prostitute and says, "Hey, I'll give you $500 for whatever act," that wasn't allowed. That was against policy and against the case law that documents those or governs those types of investigations. Why is that? Why is the undercover officer not allowed to just throw out an amount of money, especially an absorbent amount of money?
Sure.
In a way, yeah, in a way. Because what if it was wrong? What if that wasn't a prostitute? Maybe the prostitute is dressed the part in a known prostitution area and walking up and down the street with no intended location, no intended destination, back and forth for hours at a time, and it has all those what we call objective symptoms of being somebody that's in the sex trade. What if he's wrong? What if the undercover officer's wrong? And he just offered somebody who's down on their luck and needed $500 bad to feed their kids, and he just said, "All right, I'll give you $500," and she had no intention of doing it, but that offer changed her mind. That could be a defense. We talk about defenses and excuses. That could be a defense, right? So change that around, and if the undercover officer then engages that person in a conversation and waits for that person to either throw out a price or make it evident that they're going to banter back and forth and avoid doing that, then at that point it's less of a defense. Because if the person wasn't wanting to engage in criminal activity, they would have shunned that conversation. Usually, if a stranger drives up to you and starts engaging in conversation about dates and whatnot, if you're not interested in engaging in criminal activity, you're probably going to be like, "What the heck are you doing? Get away from me, creepo." So that's where that defense loses a little bit of water. But if you just drive up and offer somebody money, that opportunity, you presented them a crime of opportunity. So what motivated, going back to that scenario of the laptop in the passenger seat, either the person who planned on taking it or somebody who was just surprised by the opportunity, what motivates them to take that laptop? They said they need to do a laptop, is that what you said? Yeah. So the need, one way to put that is, if you're fulfilling a need, there's a pleasure response. So there's an illicit pleasure in fulfilling that need through the criminal activity. Sometimes it feels different. Sometimes, philosophers say it could feel better getting one over on folks, or not having to work for it, or not having to spend your own money, or being able to find an easier way to do it would cause some sort of illicit reward. So how do we discourage that behavior? Discourage people from wanting that pleasure of breaking the law? What do we have in place that keeps people from breaking the law now? Attached to laws, and we can't have a law without a penalty, right? There's got to be some sort of penalty. And then the purpose for that penalty, we've said there's a ton of different purposes for penalties. There's incapacitation, there's just deserts, there's rehabilitation, and sometimes it's just punishment. Sometimes you're just sentencing somebody, giving somebody a penalty just to punish them. And if you look at that relationship between pleasure, crime and pleasure, it is said that the only way to stop that connection between crime and pleasure is through pure punishment, not through rehabilitation, not through incapacitation. So when we look at the penalties associated with crimes where we're trying to specifically stop somebody from feeling those feelings of pleasure associated with crime, we're looking to punish them. So today, specifically, in this chapter, we're going to look at the classical theories of criminal behavior, classical theories of criminology. And we need to have some baseline assumptions to understand why these classical criminologists thought the way they did. And so we'll just go over them one by one. First one. Human beings are fundamentally rational, and most human behavior is the result of free will coupled with rational choice. So in this case, we're not talking about folks that are making irrational decisions. We're talking about, you have to assume that most people are going to make a decision that's based on their own best interest, and that they have the option of not breaking the law. So if we're going to make the decision to that we have to sanction or censure members of our society, then we're essentially taking away benefits of these human benefits that we inherently have of privacy or being able to say whatever you want. We have these inherent natural rights, but once you become part of a society that agrees that we're going to punish each other, some of those punishments are going to take away those rights. Do you have, I mean, think about the prison environment or the jail environment. Do you have as much privacy in a jail environment that you would in your home? No. So we have to, as a society, come to the agreement that we are willing to forego some of these rights for the benefit of our society. We talked about it a week or two ago with regard to TSA. You have the right to be free of unreasonable search and seizures. The Fourth Amendment gives you that, and in general, you have a right to privacy. More human than a Bill of Rights, right? But you give up those rights. As a society, we've decided, hey, I'm willing to give up these and have my bag searched or have my person x-rayed in exchange for being safe when I fly. That is what society has come to. Or excuse me, that's what society has come to the agreement for. There are arguments back and forth. So sometimes people disagree with these. They say that I don't want to give up these rights, and then they'll fight that decision either through hiring electing different legislators or representatives, things like that, or just not engaging in that behavior, not flying. So we also talked about these social contracts and how we as a society have come with these ideas that this is what is acceptable versus this is what is not acceptable. Some of them are criminal. We've decided that as a society, murder is not acceptable. Rape, robbery, those are not acceptable behaviors. But then there's other behaviors that are still not as acceptable, not necessarily criminal. What term do we use for that? You just wrote a paper on it. Right, deviant. So deviance isn't necessarily against the law, but we say that you shouldn't be doing it. So here we have two other terms. Some people pronounce it mores, moras, mores is one of them. Those are the ideas that society will function, will cease to function the way we want it if you start doing these things. That's where our laws come from. But you also have these far lesser violations, if you will, of standards, of community standards, social contract, folkways. Folkways are just like, they're customs that we just decide that this is what we're going to do. And if you violate a folkway, society's not going to crumble. And you're probably not going to end up in jail because it's not so serious that you think, well, man, if this person broke this folkway, they got to go. So one of the societal mores is that we don't kill each other in general. That essentially that societal decision, that social contract, eventually became codified into law, and now you could be penalized, incarcerated for it. But can you give me an example, or can you think of some examples of these folkways, things that wouldn't necessarily send you to jail, just maybe people look at you a little sideways? A lot of them have to do with just manners. I think it was this class we talked about not holding the door for somebody. That's just something in society we've just decided that that's usually what you do. You're not going to go to jail for it if you don't. We're using silverware. If you're eating with somebody else and you start eating with your hands, it's not gonna be the end of society if you do that. There's no societal breakdown. You're not going to go to jail. You're not going to go to prison. There's no violation of law. It's just something that, folkway is just something that Folks have decided this social contract, this is what we do. We chew with our mouth closed. We're done with a couple examples. It doesn't have to necessarily be a manners thing. Why do we come to class? Why do we hold school during the day? Is there a legal reason why we do it? No, it's just kind of what we always do. In general, outside of folks who work overnight shifts and we work during the day, we sleep at night. That's just what we do. That's just our custom. Sure, there may be some biological backings to that where the body is circadian rhythms and whatnot. It's more healthy, but in general, it's just a custom. It's what we do. We start our day around 7, 8, 9, and we end it around 3, 4, 5 o'clock. And that's just our custom. It could be a human custom. Maybe it's just an American custom. Maybe other countries and other continents may start their day a little bit later and end it a little bit later. But what we do generally is we start around 7, 8, 9 o'clock, and we end around 3, 4, 5. That's just what we do. It's a folk way. If you start your day at noon and end it at 8 or 10 o'clock at night, nobody's going to jail. It's just different. I think one example we use is if you decide not to wear shoes to class. People might look at you sideways. There's going to be some sort of, not necessarily censure, but there's like a societal pressure to follow these folk ways. Because if people see you not wearing shoes, they're going to wonder why and maybe treat you a little differently. Going back to the motivation for these, I want to make sure I do not have a degree in Latin, so I want to make sure I spell these right. These look familiar? 2 violations of laws, 2 different motivations for laws. I'll say it's wrong because it's wrong. It's just inherently wrong. We don't need a law. I don't need a code to tell me that certain things are wrong. I do have them. There's a ton of laws out there that say it, but I don't need, as a human, as a rational human, I don't need any mala and say behavior codified or for me to know stuff. It's not right. What are some things that you just know are not right? But they're laws too. Murder, yeah, exactly, yeah. So we know, as rational human beings, we know that killing somebody else or committing murder, I'll draw back from killing because there's self-defense and things like that, but murder specifically, the unreasonable killing of another person is wrong. You can't just willy-nilly kill people. We don't need a law to tell us that. We have one because we need to codify it, we need to have some set sanctions before it, and that's why we have to codify. But in general, even if we didn't have a law for murder isn't necessarily going to skyrocket. It's not going to turn into the purge because we didn't codify murder. Hopefully we have enough rational people in society that wouldn't happen. So the opposite of that would be mala prohibita. Mala prohibita. Those are laws that we need it written down. Otherwise, we wouldn't necessarily know it was against the law. Or we wouldn't just necessarily know that it was wrong. What's the speed limit out here on the main road? 35? The one, yeah, our main school road here. I think it's 35 miles an hour. If that sign wasn't there and you were going 45, do you think you would know, do you think you would feel in your soul that you were doing something wrong? Just inherently humanly wrong, going 45 on that street? No. The only reason we know that going 45 on that street is prohibited is because we have a law saying it. The law says you have to go 35 because there's a sign there. That's what mala prohibita is. You need something, a legislator or some legislature to tell you that that is wrong. So if you look in the, as early days when we didn't have a lot of scientific explanations, and the early days of criminology, when they didn't realize they were studying criminology, they just thought they were looking at causes for crime, you would have folks who would break the law. And you would have folks, let me give you an example. If you are you're in Raleigh, and you see a guy talking to himself, and he's wearing no shirt and just barely wearing pants, they're all disheveled and ripped up. He's filthy, looks like he hasn't eaten in days, and he's screaming at himself and screaming at, appears to be having a conversation, but there's nobody there, but he's having a really passionate, angry conversation with nothing. What are your thoughts about that? What do we have? I'm sorry? Mentally unstable. We might have a mental health crisis. What else? Homeless? On drugs. So we could, which, sometimes those two go hand in hand. You can have mental illness. You can have narcotics abuse or narcotics influence. And sometimes you can have some sort of narcotic-based psychosis, where you're using drugs and it causes a mental breakdown, or the continued use of drugs causes a mental breakdown. So you have what appears to be a mental health issue, but the mental health crisis is inherently based in narcotics use. Yes.
So that reminds me. So last night, my friend is a cop in Selma.
Okay.
So she arrested a guy that is deaf, mentally, I don't know how to say this in the correct term.
Like some sort of developmental disability?
Yes.
Okay.
And he was driving drunk. So
All right.
in that case, would he go to jail or would he go to mental hospital?
Well, it would depend on what options that jurisdiction has. Some options can give you the ability to take away somebody's rights to freedom, to send them to a mental facility, not necessarily a mental hospital. But those are very, very narrow scope of criteria. In general, you have to be a danger to yourself, a danger to others, and or gravely disabled, and that has to be based on a mental illness. So, take away the developmental disability, which isn't necessarily a mental illness, like Down syndromes and things like that are in that category of developmental disabilities, but isn't necessarily going to be a mental illness.
Yeah, but she used the words mentally retarded, like he was like completely incompetent.
Right.
So he was not able to.
So a lot of times that is rooted in more of a developmental issue than a mental health issue. They really are bifurcated. But in general, if you have a mental health, if somebody is in having a mental health crisis and they are dangerous to self, danger to others, or unable to care for themselves, then you can involuntarily commit them for a limited number of hours for them to essentially be rectified and be placed on meds so that they're not in a crisis. The only time we can take away somebody's liberties in a mental health crisis is when they're actually in that crisis and it's only a temporary issue. And when we talk about putting somebody in a mental hospital, we, as a law enforcement officer, we don't do that. That's a sentence. We talk about having an excuse for crime, and then you can be sentenced to a lengthy stay in a mental hospital. But to take away somebody's liberties without some due process is very, very rare. So the guy that we use as an example, walking down the street. Either, I think we came to the agreement, he's either on some sort of narcotic or mentally ill. Can that lead to a crime? Him talking to himself, screaming, becoming agitated, becoming violent. Is there potential for criminal behavior to follow? Subsequent criminal behavior. What type of subsequent criminal behavior do we have? What could that lead to? If somebody interacts with him, what could he do?
Fight 'em.
Yeah, you could fight him. Punch, batteries, assaults with deadly weapon, throw something, vandalism, maybe punching a window or a car. So there is a potential for criminality there. But as what I would call a more advanced society, we immediately recognize those symptoms to be mental illness or drug use. But these earlier societies did not have the same capacity to make those decisions. They would blame that kind of behavior on being possessed, demons, having a devil inside you, things like that. I mean, those were the initial diagnoses, the initial causes for crime, especially if somebody was behaving in an irrational manner, because we already decided that in that classical school of criminology, we consider humans to be rational people. So if you're acting irrationally, it must have something, you're not human. All right, we're gonna start getting into some of these philosophers. The first age, as we kind of progress past that real beginning, those beginning ages where we're talking about demonology or demonic possession, things like that. We have an age of enlightenment. Enlightenment or reason. That's going to keep coming up. This reason, reasonability, rational. These ideas that we're giving ourselves more and more credit to be able to make decisions. So the first philosopher I want to talk about in the age of enlightenment and the age of reason, Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes. So Hobbes was one of the first theorists, or excuse me, not theorists, philosophers to come up with the idea of the social contract. That we don't need to necessarily codify something to recognize that it's wrong. We just have this idea amongst ourselves that this is how we act as a group. And I know we've talked about it previously, where different groups are going to have different social contracts. There are different social, having the same group of societies, different societies. So we talked about having a society of a homeless encampment, having different rules inside that encampment, where maybe drug use is more allowable in that society. Stealing. Some societies may believe that initiating scams or theft on somebody else is more acceptable than other societies. Parties. Depending on your group of friends, which we could call a society, a group, I have a social contract with my group of friends. And we have a get-together. Maybe punctuality is something that's inherently a core of our social contract. We all have agreed as a group that we are going to be on time. There is no fashionably late in that little society, that little group of friends, because that's just our social contract. There's no law, nothing written down. We don't have bylaws as friends. But it's just something we do. But other people have their group of friends that says, hey, if you're going to throw a party, I'm probably not going to be there until like an hour, hour and a half after it starts, because that's just what's cool in our group. That's acceptable. That's what our social contract says. So Thomas Hobbes was the first one to come up with that idea and actually write down that idea of societies having their own different social contracts. He also, what we talked about earlier, he was also one of the first ones that came up with that idea of, if you're going to be in a society, then it's going to be a give and take. You're going to have to give up some rights, some privileges for the privilege of being in this society. So if you are going to be in our society, we'll talk about just the American society. If you're going to be in our social contract, our social group, you have to understand that if you fly, you're going to have to go through an X-ray or a scanner. If you break these minor laws, you're going to have to get fined. You may have a right to your own possession and your own property, but in order to be in our society, you have to agree that you're willing to give up some of your property if you break the law. Whereas if you move out of our society, you move into the woods and you never interact with anybody, you're probably never going to get fined. You're not, the separatists and folks that want to be outside of the realm of society, part of that motivation is that they don't want to obey those rules. They don't want to engage in that social contract. They don't want the give and take. I don't want your benefits, and in exchange, I also don't want to give up my rights. That's why somebody would move out of a society or move to a different society. If I want to engage in drug use in an open forum, I can't do that as long as I'm teaching at JCC. But maybe I move to a homeless encampment and give up my job and start eating down at a dumpster or waiting for homeless handouts, then I can have that. That's the give and take. I have to give up some things to get what I want. It's like my dad. My dad used to always give the same advice over and over. He would say, any decision I had, he would say, you have to figure out what you want in life and what you're willing to give up to get it. I used to get so frustrated because every dilemma I had, he would say that, but it's so true. It's true with society, it's true with school. I can come up here, I could have had a lot more fun this weekend. But I studied for the several lectures I had this week. Because I want those lectures to be successful. One, I don't want to look silly. Two, I want you guys to have the information and the rest of the classes have the information that you deserve, that you pay for, this product that you pay for. I want you to get a good customer service type of product. But I had to give up something to get that. I had to give up some leisure time. So I figured out what I want in life. I want to be successful in this endeavor. So I had to give up this other desire. Is it, and I'm going to use this term loosely, is it painful to give up something I want? I don't mean like physically painful, but it kind of stinks, right? So in a way, that is a painful decision. And if what I want, in this case, I want successful lectures all the time. Do I find pleasure in performing that, in successfully reaching that goal? Is there a pleasure in that for me? Yeah, if that's what I want more than the other thing. So keep this in mind because we're going to touch back on this. Very, very key point in this entire chapter. I chose to avoid pain. I did a cost-benefit analysis. I don't want to go with pain living. I did a cost-benefit analysis. I looked at it and I thought, what am I going to gain versus what's it going to cost me? And the gains outweighed the costs, and so that's the decision I made. We're going to get back to pain and pleasure. The next philosopher, John Locke, Locke with an E, L-O-C-K-E. John came up with this idea, he suggested that when we're born, we're just a blank slate. We don't have these inherent biases, we don't have these inherent behaviors, we're not necessarily going to be criminals or good folks. It just depends on, well, depends on what are some factors that would change us if our blank slate when we're born?
Environment.
Yeah, environment. Influences, yeah. So what kinds of environmental and influence factors do we have?
Positive and negative.
Absolutely. What are some examples?
The place you're born, the parents you're born to.
Yeah. So where you're born, who you're born to could be, so the type of parenting. So they were born with a blank slate, but they became a certain type of person. Your parents are all, my parents are a type of person, your parents are a type of person. So the influences of parental raising or even just regional, because your parents are the only ones who are able to influence you. You think about how much you see your parents in, we use high school, for example. When you were in high school, let's just give me an estimate. How many hours a day did you physically see your parents? Just give me a guess.
6 to 8.
You saw 6 or 8 hours a day? Okay. Yeah, so from like 3 to
10.
3 to 10? Yeah. You were in school at least that amount of time. So you have other competing influential factors. I'm not going to say opposite, because sometimes the things that my parents would have taught me, the values, the goals, the motivations that my parents would have instilled upon me are also going to be instilled upon me by my friends and my teachers and my coaches. But sometimes they're not. Sometimes, that's why I call them competing. Sometimes they're opposite. Sometimes you hang out with your friends that may be deviant. And then what do we, deviance and when it comes to juvenile deviance, what do we call that?
Delinquent.
Delinquent. So maybe you're hanging out with a bunch of juvenile delinquents. Those are probably serious competing, if not opposite environmental or influential factors than your parents would have. So your parents have you for 6 or 8 hours, I would say at the max in a day, and the school has you that same amount. So those competing factors, that when you become a blank slate, you're going to have all these different inputs that are going to influence who you become. And that's what John Locke was talking about. John Locke also further amplified the idea that we have social contracts, as well as that give and take, that the idea that we're going to exchange rights for freedoms. Especially when it comes to freedoms, John Locke talked about we're exchanging rights for protection and welfare. Not necessarily the financial welfare that we hear, not handouts, but just being your well-being. If you're part of what you agree to be in a society for is well-being, protection. So you have police officers, firefighters, and EMS people that are going to come take care of doctors, hospitals, pros. You agree to be in this society because all those things are going to make you safer, kind of give you a better well-being and a better welfare. So we touched on it, and I'll expand on a little more. These natural rights. There's something called natural law. And it goes up to be a little bit of what we talked about with Mala and Say. There are just, as humans, natural law says that you know that you can't do some things. When we describe specific acts, we will describe them as being part of the Mala and Say. But in general, natural law will describe that entire idea of these are the behaviors, the actions, the deviance, if you will, that you cannot engage in. And you know that because it's a natural law. You don't need anybody to tell you that. So Mala and Say and Mala Previta come from that idea of natural law. That idea was not just an ancient idea. It came all the way into the creation of this country. That natural law was part of the basis that Thomas Jefferson used, even in the Constitution, the idea of natural law and what is right and what is wrong. A lot of the founding documents, you'll see hints of natural law in there. Things like, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Could they be self-evident if we didn't just inherently know them as rational human beings? Otherwise, we need somebody to teach us, right? It would be a Mala Previta type of situation, not a natural law or Mala and Say type of situation. If we're truly holding these truths to be self-evident, to know them, then they have to be in that natural law category. And so you see those hints, those mentions in the founding documents of our own country. Moving on, nearly 100 years. Abraham Lincoln used that same natural law argument when he freed the slaves. Just inherently it is wrong to enslave somebody else. He knew it, and the folks that were battling to prohibit slavery knew it, but just because you know it's inherently wrong doesn't mean you're necessarily going to abide by that. So obviously slavery existed, it still exists today in some societies. So we may know as rational human beings that is a wrong behavior, but it doesn't stop people from doing it. Going back to that first example with the laptop in the car, can we all agree that we know it's wrong to take a laptop out of a car? But can we also agree that it's still going to happen sometimes? People can know it's wrong, still engage in that behavior. To touch on the next two philosophers, but I will say that as we engage in the class, as we start to transition into the next two philosophers, we're going to start talking about Cesare Beccaria and Jeremy Bentham. Probably touch on those later on in the week. But those two had something in common. And that was what we discussed at the beginning. They both held those same classical ideas, those same classical theories that free will and rationality are the basis for all human decision making. We all have, we're not demon possessed. There's no devil inside us making us do something. We're not born inherently bad, so we don't have a choice. There are theories that take that into account. There are theories that said that you could feel the bumps on somebody's head when they're born, and the shape of their skull will tell you whether they're going to be a good person or a bad person. Does that comport with free will at all? No. If somebody is predestined to be a criminal, then you're taking away their free will and their rationality. It's not their fault anymore. The shape of some people's skull, the shape of some people's faces, those were other just early ideas, criminological ideas, where folks believed that they could predict the criminality of somebody just based on these physical factors. I'll leave you with this. Talk about Jeremy Bentham for a moment. He talked about how when people have free will and they can make these rational decisions, it's going to culminate in something that was finally written down in the 80s called rational choice theory. Rational choice theory has its roots all the way back in the 1800s with Jeremy Bentham. And we talked about a cost-benefit analysis. In my example of wanting these lectures to be successful, we agreed that it was pleasurable. I would find pleasure in being successful in this interview. Well, we also agreed that the opposite of that would be true. That it would be, we talked about what I gave up. It was painful to give it up, but would it also be painful, in a manner of speaking, for me to look silly in front of you, to not know the material in front of you? Would that be painful for me? Sure, in a manner of speaking. I would not like that. I don't want to come to any class unprepared and be embarrassed. So in that case, I chose to prepare and seek pleasure rather than have fun, which would ultimately result in pain of not being prepared. So humans as a rational being will always, according to Jeremy Bentham and the classical school of thought, humans will always seek pleasure and avoid pain. That is a key aspect of this entire chapter. In rational decision making, humans will seek pleasure and avoid pain. How do we plug that into a decision to break the law? We'll go back to the car break-ins. If somebody is addicted to narcotics and they need to steal things in order to fund that addiction, can we stipulate that that is a common behavior among drug addicts? They have to steal things they can't afford? Okay. If somebody does not fund that addiction and is unable to feed, let alone fund that addiction, is there pain involved? Not necessarily physical, but is that painful mentally, addictive wise? It could be painful physically. Yeah. So there's a pain involved in not feeding that addiction. What pleasure is involved? Sure, feeding that addiction. So if they walk by a car, see a laptop in the front seat, is it a pleasurable experience for them to take that laptop and sell it so they can fund their addiction? So in this case, did they make a rational decision to think, I don't want to have the pain of not being able to feed my addiction. I do want to have money. So is that a rational choice for them to break into that car knowing that it's against the law. So do we have a convergence of free will and rational thought? Even if we break the law, they knew it was wrong. There's no doubt, and we're not saying they didn't know. They knew it was wrong, but they made a rational choice to engage in behavior that would bring them pleasure and help them avoid pain, regardless of the criminality. So how do we change, how do we skew that choice for them? What factors do we have to change? If it's a cost-benefit analysis, there is going to be a pain in getting caught, right? Even though there's a pleasure in feeding that addiction, there's still a pain when getting caught. There's a risk, right? But that risk reward was outweighed in this case. Obviously, it had to be outweighed because they committed the crime in our hypothetical situation. So how do we skew that risk reward decision-making process? I'm sorry? Right. So if there's a risk reward, then we have to make it riskier so that when they're making their rational decision and they're thinking, okay, well, I want to seek pleasure and I want to avoid pain. Right now, my pleasure is feeding my addiction and my pain is not feeding that addiction. However, if there's a death penalty, we'll go to the extreme. If there's a death penalty for breaking into cars, and now how do we seek pleasure in that situation? By not getting caught, right? Or not committing the crime would be the perfect choice. So the pain would be the death penalty, and not committing the crime would be the pleasure. Okay, I'm going to seek the pleasure of not dying so that I don't feel the pain of dying. No matter what decision you have, according to the rational choice theory, you're going to seek pleasure and avoid pain, and the way we skew that is through punishment. If it's a rational choice and people have free will, then punishment is the way to skew that decision making, so you make it more, you change the risk versus the reward. What are your questions today?